Hello, I'm Bruce Robinson, News Director for KRCB Public Television and Radio, and thanks for joining us. What you're about to see and hear is an exploration of some of the ideas and issues raised in the film, Not in Our Town, Life in the Darkness, as they might be applied here in Sonoma County. For the benefit of those of you who may not have seen the documentary yet, it centers on the killing of an Ecuadorian immigrant in a small town on Long Island. A young man beaten and stabbed to death by a group of white teenage boys. But that senseless hate crime also spurred the town to take a hard look at the civic and social environment in which the crime occurred, and to take some steps to try and ensure that nothing like it would happen again. Fortunately, there's no comparable tragedy facing us here and now. And I think we are all united in the fervent hope that nothing of the sort will happen here. So while we know that that's a potential problem, we're going to try to keep that hope alive and talk about it here as things are unfolding. So we have a panel assembled to talk about this issue, and I'd like to introduce them to you briefly now. On my immediate right is Patrice O'Neill, who is the director and producer of the Not in Our Town film, and we'll talk about its history and some of the connections it has to Sonoma County as the program unfolds. Imam Ali Siddiqui is a leader of the Muslim community. He's involved with the Muslim Institute for the, I hope I get this right, Interfaith and Understanding.
Interfaith Studies and Understanding.
Okay, and that's based here in Santa Rosa. We want to thank you very much for being with us. And rounding out our group is Leticia Romero, who is here as part of the Committee on Immigrant Rights, an activist group here in Sonoma County. So thank you also for being here. We had hoped to have the Sheriff of Sonoma County join us. He was not able to do that this evening, but we will try to represent the law enforcement perspective as we go along as well. We will be asking for some comments and questions from the audience here in the studio as the program unfolds, and we'll sort all of that out as we move forward. To begin with, I'd like to begin with some reflections, some ideas. This is a powerful film, and a lot of people speaking from their heart in some very straightforward ways. I found that very moving in places, and I want to ask each of our panelists here to share what it was in the movie, what moments spoke to you most directly. And Leticia, since you're kind of across from me here, I'm going to put you on the spot first and ask you, what was it that got to you about this?
Well, first of all, I felt anger. I went back to my childhood and remembered some of the incidences, some of the experiences that I had had as a child living in Germany and not speaking the English language and being picked on because of that, being called names and being spit on. And that, you know, that was many years ago, and here we are, and hate crimes and are still, you know, being done. Also, one of the images that I saw at the beginning of the film after the young man had been murdered with the police officers, the image of the police officers and with the vests of ICE or vice versa, that is also something that happens here in our own county, and that resonated with me. It's I feel something that doesn't build trust. People need to know, you know, if a police officer is a police officer in their uniform, and an immigration border patrol in theirs. Immigration is not allowed to go directly into the homes, whereas police officers may, and so that's confusing as they go and knock on people's doors. And again, it's...
So this gets in the way of trust and feeling comfortable in your home environment.
Right.
Mm-hmm. Imam Siddiqui, I want to ask you, as both as a religious leader and as a representative of a smaller and less visible minority amongst us, what in this film spoke to you?
Well, several things. One of the things that I noticed that although people subjected to harassment, they don't speak up. And same thing we face in our community. They're facing difficulties, they're facing harassment, discrimination, but they don't come up and talk to anybody. And this may be also people who are new immigrant. They have a bad experience from their old countries, and they don't want to go and talk to the police, they don't want to go talk to immigration people, they want to go to talk to anybody of authority. So several small incidents has happened in Santa Rosa, but people do not report. The other thing which I learned from this, which is very common, that we do not communicate with our children. So I learned, my wife and I learned that my daughters face difficulty during high school, but they never talk to us. And thus I saw in this film also that there was something brewing in the school, but nobody talked about it. And the last thing, which is really shocking, it takes a death to wake up the community. So we have to prepare martyrs among us to bring community together. I think we are more civilized today, that we can do better and differently. So as this film has created a movement, I was talking earlier about not in our town, I was in Tampa Bay, Florida, and there something happened, the students get together and talk about it. Earlier than a death. So this is something we have to really come to grip with, that we have to start talking, and also in our neighborhoods, that we have to become more open towards each other. We are high and by community. We see in the morning somebody leaving the garage or shutting the garage door, say, oh, hi. And then by right away, we don't know each other. So this is something that we need to do, and we saw that in this town, that people come together, and the mayor talking about that he lived there, he didn't know his neighbors. And he depends on their votes.
If anybody's going to know the neighbors, you'd think it'd be the politician. Let me also say that if anybody in the audience here has some reactions that they'd like to share on their cards, we'd like to invite you to submit those. Also, there were moments I found personally that were very inspiring in this film, and if there are moments of those that you'd like to share, we invite those as well. And I want to put that same question to the folks on the panel here. On the upside, on the side that wasn't disturbing, the side that wasn't worrisome, what did you take from the reaction that was shown here that you can feel good about, that you found some inspiration in?
I think one thing I can relate to a little bit, because we lived also upstate New York. We had a different experience when we lived upstate New York in a small town, a small village known as Scotia. There, people are very welcoming. I mean, extremely welcoming. They threw a party for us when we were moving in. I was very sick at the time. I had a back problem. They brought food. They left food on the doorstep. They said, we don't want to disturb you. They talked to the realtor to find out if we have any diet requirement, and they met the diet requirement even. They went out of their way.
Impressive.
Very impressive. There was a cathedral on the cul-de-sac, and we wanted to use the facility for one of our holidays. I went there and talked to the girl in the front office, and we rented a room. I paid about $50 for that. As I came back, walking back, phone rang, and the priest called and said, Mr. Siddiqui, this is your church. You don't have to pay. You can use anytime you want it. So that welcoming experience, I had that. And Suffolk County, I have given several sermons there when I was there in the 80s. And going there, I taught students there. But these things happen, and whether this is due to new things happening, and we are, as in the film is mentioned, that we are immigrant communities. Whether we are third generation, fourth generation, if you are not Indians, we are immigrants. And we have to be very welcoming to other people. So now in this one, after the death of the young man, they really changed. And the whole community mobilized. The students mobilized. The city mobilized. So this is something very positive that happened.
Leticia, what did you take from this that you can see positively?
I was impressed that out of a tragic incident, people didn't just come together at that time, but it continued on for another year and then another year thereafter. The family coming back after they had gone to Ecuador, when the community honored and remembered the young man that had passed on. The community coming together in theater and celebrating with dance, different types of dance. The women making the quilts, that lending itself for the women to reflect on what had happened in their community, and taking action, you know, for the betterment of the community. I think that those types of ideas are good to implement as prevention, and not wait for something tragic to happen, but, you know, how can we start, you know, talking to our neighbors and really getting to know one another, and not just the hi and bye as we come in and out of our doors. Really, you know, sitting down and getting to know one another. It's that relationship building and learning what we have in common with our stories and also our differences.
I think for myself, one of the pivotal moments is when the observation was made that whatever spurred the kids to go out and do their rampaging, the idea that they learned it from somewhere, that this didn't occur in a vacuum. And that to me is kind of the pivot point, where both in the film and in the events that you were documenting, that recognition seemed to be a real crucial point, that it stopped being about finger pointing and it started being about us, whoever us is in this instance. And I want to ask you a little bit about the process of capturing all of this. We were speaking earlier and you said you got some early inklings in the events unfolding there that something special might be happening in this town. What tipped you off?
Well, I think we had been to a number of towns because we'd heard many stories about anti-immigrant violence around the country, and we went to a number of places where there had been violence, where there had in fact been killings, and the people who are trying to stand up sometimes receive death threats, and rather than the kind of response that you saw immediately after Marcelo Lucero's death in Patchogue, you would see anti-immigrant marches. So there was an atmosphere in some other communities that made it very difficult for people who wanted to stand up to do that. And so about a week after Marcelo Lucero was killed, about 500 people gathered at the train station in the pouring rain and said, we have to do something. And I think we heard two voices there that were really crucial. One, Marcelo Lucero's brother, who said, I'm not going to stand in the shadows anymore. He became a voice not only for his family, but the immigrant community. And that was so important for him to be able to speak to people about the pain he was going through, but to speak for many immigrants. And then the mayor of the town, Paul Pontieri. I think he was obviously a pivotal figure because civic leaders so often set the tone for how a community will react. And I think there's this tendency to deny that there's a problem, or deny that the town or the community or the atmosphere has anything to do with it, and say, oh, it was those kids, it was their parents, et cetera. And I think one of the things he did that was really significant is he owned it, and he said, it happened on my watch, and I have to do something about it. And so I think that kind of soul searching and speaking about it in that way to the community made such a difference. And, you know, I think many people woke up. They woke up in the town and said, okay, what do we do now? And I, you know, that was a story that we wanted to follow. We didn't know where it would go, but I think that was an early indication that you know, we should keep moving with this film.
Did it go where you think it would go?
I think that I was really heartened by the persistence, as you say, the persistence, that it isn't, that change, as the mayor says, it's like turning a battleship, that you don't turn on a dime with a really horrific crime like this. You don't, and if you're honest and you say, perhaps it was the atmosphere that allowed these young people to think that this was okay, that they could roam the streets of this community for months and attack people simply because of the way they looked and their identity, that doesn't it takes a long time for that to happen, and it takes a long time to turn it around. And I don't think that Patchogue or any other place where this kind of crime has happened is instantly transformed. I think it's a challenge to look at a story where you want to see the process of change. And there aren't these like sudden bursts of activity where everything's all better. I mean, it is a process, and I think it's a process also to prevent hate crimes. It's a process that we, begin and continue.
Now, the first Not in Our Town was done almost 16 years ago, 17 years ago. In that time, the very concept of hate crimes has really kind of come out of the shadows and into the foreground, so that we have language, we have laws, we have maybe some different attitudes that have emerged just in the last generation.
I think one of the significant things about the original story in Billings, Montana, that helped, and there were many other things that allowed this to happen, but the police chief in Billings, I think, played a really vital role. He said to the community, this isn't just a law enforcement problem, this is a community problem. And as the police chief, I want to work with the community to address this. And he said, silence is acceptance. And I think that was really important. And I think there has been a tremendous change in law enforcement over the years in training and understanding how important it is to understand hate crimes, to work on making victims feel safe to report hate crimes. I think we have a long way to go on that, but I do think that there's been a lot of changes. We have new hate crime laws that were passed just recently that recognize that whoever is the victim, we're going to pay attention to that on a legal basis.
I think Lucero's brother's role is very important. He stayed behind and lived there, and what he's doing, if he continues to do that, I think it's going to really mobilize youth. Mm-hmm. And then he's bringing a lot of vigor in the movement. And he is a very pleasant person to do that. And the mayor's ownership, the mayor took the ownership. This is very important. In many cases, we see that our city fathers or mothers also, they don't take the ownership. They think, well, this is not our problem, unless something is brought to their attention into the city council meeting or something. So here, he took personally, and then he mobilized the community and passed the regulations.
I want to acknowledge a couple of comments that have come in from people in the audience here. Someone shared that their brother went to elementary school and got some instruction there in reaching out to talk to other members of the community so that they could be proactive about tolerance. And that is very encouraging to me, because as you were just mentioning, getting these sorts of attitudes, they take hold at a very early age, either in a positive way or a negative way. Yeah. And we saw that in the film, that it was, although they talked about it at the high school, it seemed like in some ways the more heartfelt reaction occurred at the junior high level, a bit younger. In looking at this and thinking about what happened, we're a long way from Long Island here, but I wonder what similarities, what differences do you see between the community there and the one that we circulate in every day? Leticia, anything come to mind for you in that respect?
Well, I still have in mind the comments about, the tolerance, and the comment that was made by one of the gentlemen saying that the apple doesn't fall far from the peach tree. Hate, we're not born knowing how to hate, it's learned. And the young children, at the school, I think that the younger they are and we begin to talk to our youth about acceptance, and also speaking out when, they do hear, someone harassing another person or insulting, really finding ways to continue that and grow that, make that become a movement in our schools, in our neighborhoods.
There's an anti-bullying program that has kind of grown up here in Sonoma County, the Safe School Ambassadors program, and one of the things that they teach the kids that I think is very powerful is when you see something like that where somebody's being picked on, to respond simply by walking up and saying, "Hey, this is my friend. Leave him alone." You know, even if they're not their friend, just to speak up and nip it in the bud. There's a line in a song I like where the songwriter refers to a play yard sense of justice. And I think that's kind of innate at a certain level that before all the cultural overlays begin to erode that or kind of damp it down a little bit. As you've been to other communities that have looked at this, have done workshops, have developed their own programs, youth must be a big part of it in a lot of places.
I think we have so much to learn from our young people. Not in Our School, when the Not in Our Town movement emerged, Not in Our School came up as an idea and an activity very, very quickly. There are young people all over this country who are sort of empowered by their teachers to take on these issues. And I think so often, as you say, you know, there's this silence among young people. They talk to themselves, and the adult world doesn't often hear what they're experiencing and you know what they're going through. And I think Not in Our School is a very powerful idea that we have been documenting for quite a number of years. The most successful places, I think, are those where the teachers and the school administrators create a space for the young people to create this peer-to-peer action, where the young people, as you say, and you know, I think that's a great example, where they say to each other, "Not in our school, we're not going to do this." They find a way, and it's going to be their way. It's going to be something that they invent. It is going to be something that comes from them. There are young people that are mapping where bullying takes place in their school and trying to figure out where that happens. You know, I think, you know, what they come up with is what can help them change. And you know, that's very much related to how Not in Our Town works. We have learned so much. We never invented Not in Our Town. Not in Our Town was invented in community after community and built upon by incredibly great ideas that people thought of and implemented either because of a crime or because they cared very passionately about their town and they wanted to make sure nothing happened there. So, you know, I think there are many examples of this that we've learned about over the years. What do you do if a hate group comes to your town? Well, people have had to learn that and deal with it, you know, during some very tense times. But the answers they've come up with are really remarkable and have you know, something adversarial like that has been able to bring them together. So it's a lot to learn.
Yeah. Have you developed like a curriculum then to take into the schools to help facilitate some of these lessons, or these, and at what age level is it pitched, if you have? So
there, through Not in Our Town and NIOT.org and IOT.org, there's a whole section called Not in Our School, and it was invented. All of the activities that are there were invented by teachers and students, and then we document them and we share them on that site. And then Facing History in Ourselves, this tremendous education organization, writes the curriculum for teachers. But many of the activities were invented by the young people themselves. And then, you know, people sort of build on them and learn that way.
One of the things that struck me early on was the surprise that a lot of the people outside the targeted community expressed that something like this could happen, whereas the minority people were not the least bit surprised that it happened, only that perhaps it was this severe this time. Does the same thing, in your experience, happen around here? That there are these sort of smaller incidents that could build into something bigger, but nobody says anything because they're still a small incident? Is that a problem that is ignored here?
I think so. I think that from stories that I've heard from families and youth, there's a fear. And, you know, our youth wake up in the morning and they go out the door and go to school, but there's a fear of, you know, what's going to happen to me on my way to school? What's going to happen when I get back home? Are my parents, is my uncle, is my aunt, my grandma, are they going to be there? For different reasons, you know, for deportation, for harassment of, you know, other youth. And I think that those of us who, I'm going to say, live more in the surrounding areas where the populations are, that those things are existing, know and hear of those things. But other people in our neighborhood, in our county, in our city may not be aware.
Well, when these incidents occur, are they talked about within the neighborhoods, or does it all just get hushed up immediately?
Well, I think there has to be mechanisms, places, you know, safe places for people to come and talk about these things. I would say that the Committee for Immigrant Rights is one of those places. You know, I used to work in Santa Rosa City Schools, and I would hear the stories from children and from families. And I work today mostly with day laborers, and I hear their stories. And as, you know, I'm doing my daily activities and in other realms, dancing or whatever, I'm hearing stories. And so bringing that to the Committee for Immigrant Rights for people to come and share and express and learn about what it is that they can do. What are some of their rights? Who else can you go and talk to? You know, is it a teacher? Is it an employer? Is it law enforcement? I think that one of the things also is assuring that there is trust and that they do feel safe in speaking out.
Safety within the neighborhood, or is there enough of that bonding for there to be that sort of a resource from one block, from one street to the next? Or does it depend which street or which block you're talking about?
Yeah, I would say it depends. I don't think that, and even then, you know, there's so much work to be done. I'm glad to be, you know, here and talking about this and thinking of ways that we can begin to talk more about that. You have something to say?
Well, I was just going to say that we've been really inspired about some of the things that have happened around the country, screenings of this film where people have come together in libraries and schools and civic meetings. And I think the idea and what we hope for with this film is that you bring together a group of people so that these issues can be surfaced in a safe place where everyone feels welcome and people can come in a kind of neutral space where everyone can talk about this and say, hey, what's going on? And then you have some key people who can take action. Then you have law enforcement there, you have school leaders there, you have teachers there, you have civic leaders, and everyone's in the same room. And you know, it's very clear that people who are vulnerable, people this has happened to, can speak about what's happened to them. And I think we've been really excited to hear the stories about that from screenings of this film, and we hope that this screening on KRCB leads to many more in the community.
This suggests to me that it's not an organic process, that this requires some convening, some catalyzing agent to instigate these conversations, and that doesn't happen organically. It takes somebody stepping forward to seize that role. And I guess that's a pattern that you are both embracing and trying to inspire.
Absolutely, and I have to say that I think public media is playing a vital role in that you're convening this meeting, that you are bringing people together, and that's happening around the country. I think librarians are doing that. I think the immigrant community is doing that, and I think, you know, we're trying to give people the tools they need to do that and let them take charge of how to do that, because we think people in their own communities know how to do that best. So I'm really excited, and I'm very happy to be here and part of this process tonight.
I'd like to also suggest to those of you who are watching this evening that if you find ideas in this that are moving you to action or that are something you feel is worthy of sharing, this is out in a way that we can distribute and make it available to anybody. Send the link, pass it along through whatever social media you want, share it in any way that you feel would be constructive or useful. That's part of why we're doing all this, to try to do our little bit to drop the pebble in and see where the ripples might flow from here. Yes, Juan.
So actually the fear factor is very common in our communities also. Not only just here in Santa Rosa, but throughout the country. And the fear is that, you know, if the Muslim speaks up, or Arabs or South Asian, you know, then they will be targeted by law enforcement. And so that's the idea of having a safe place that they can come and talk. And these people are not, they are not undocumented, they have legal status, but they're still fearful. And they don't want to speak up. Anything happen to them, they will never come and talk to you. For example, the example I have, I'll give you that our local masjid is a house within the Unitarian Universalist. And on the door of that, somebody scribbled. So they didn't want to make a big case of it. They went over and pinned it. So we don't know what it said on it. It was a hate statement or what. So they are very fearful. They don't want to create waves. They don't want to bring attention of the law enforcement community. So somebody has to create a space for these people so they can come and speak.
Do they bring these fears to you, the people within your community, when this happens, or do they just tamp it down?
So there's another issue. So actually, for me, a lot of people talk with me. But community at large, really, they don't talk. And also, we do not, our ministry is very voluntary. We don't have a full-time people who minister the community. So there's no avenue for them to go and talk to.
In the communities that we've talked about and other places, the emergence of interfaith leaders to stand up and bridge different communities has been a very powerful piece of these conversations in the past.
I think in so many places, faith leaders have played a remarkable role in bringing people together and sort of finding those institutions that can do that. You know, interfaith groups, libraries, as we said. Where are people gathering together? Where can people feel safe? And how can they be brought together? I don't know if you participate in an interfaith group here, but it seems like
actually, we do, a Muslim community and Jewish community meet together in our homes. So it's called Jewish-Muslim Dialogue. It's started by the North Bay Muslim community and also Shomer Torah. And we meet once a month. And it's a long drawn meeting, like it lasts 3 hours. We break food, we share food together, and we sit in our houses and sit and talk, and we can talk anything. So it is like creating a safe place. And it is going on for 2 years now.
So that's really getting to know your neighbors, right?
But unfortunately, these are not neighbors, they're extended neighbors, you can say. Mm-hmm. They're coming from different areas and living in Sonoma County. So, but regardless of that, it is a very good experience. And then the Jewish community has told Muslim community, if anything happened to you, we'll stand by you. So this is an assurance that we were looking for.
You got to make you feel good to hear about that, but do you feel left out at the same time? That this is, or what sort of outreach could happen that would address?
Well, hearing some of what he was saying in regards to the house meetings, you know, those are house meetings that can take place not just with, you know, immediate family and friends, but it can be done within an apartment or a certain block area. I think parks, you know, things that already exist in our neighborhoods. I'm thinking of the neighborhood that I live in Roseland. Bear Farm, you know, is one of those places where a lot of families are coming together, not only learning about fruits and vegetables, but talking to one another about incidents that do happen in the school or around the neighborhood, and how can they collectively address those issues.
For the many people who don't know about Bear Farm, tell the world a little bit about that environment and that story, because that's a real remarkable instance here in our own backyard.
Magdalena Ridley is a resident of Roseland. She works with land paths, and it was a piece of land that, you know, was just bare. It's right in the heart of Roseland. There's a school that's right across, and then another school.
Owned by the city, as I believe.
Pardon?
Land was owned by the city.
Land was owned by the city, and they partnered up. And it started as individual plots for families to start growing, you know, their own food. Well, it grew more than just people coming together to grow their food. It really created community and educational workshops, and going on hikes together, learning about different cultures. Even Latino people think that people are all Mexican. Well, we're not all Mexican. There's Puerto Ricans, and there's Nicaraguenses, and from Ecuador, and also learning about ourselves and and our commonalities, our differences. So Bayer Farm is a place, it's a park, it's a farm, it's a place where people can just go and sit, and it's a safe place. I'm going to mention another example. We talk about safety. What is safety? A crosswalk, for example. If there have been several accidents already, around that same or lack of crosswalk, and you're hearing that residents are wanting to do something about that crosswalk, and who do they go to? Who do they talk to? And again, coming together and connecting people with one another, and not doing the walking for people, but walking side by side and going to public works. And these are the people that you talk to about, and maybe that first meeting is going to be an informational meeting, and immediately residents are empowered to learn about, okay, these are the people that I go to, and learn about creating safety for the 170 students that walk daily to school. So that eliminates that fear regarding safety. So these are just some examples of what we can do collectively to help one another.
Watching it from afar, I've been very inspired by the way the Bayer Farm community has grown in a very organic way, which of course is very appropriate for that site. But it wasn't a externally organized thing. It was something that seemed to come together out of its own energies.
Energies and needs from the community, really having community there and give their input, and this is what we would like, and this is what we need in our neighborhood. That's how that has come to be.
Patrice, I'm getting a couple of questions for you here. So one of them has been, since you started doing the first film, the emergence of social media has erupted, and how does that play into what you do and what you're trying to counter at the same time? It's kind of a two-edged sword, I imagine.
I think the internet is really troubling in terms of the kind of hate that it's spreading. It's especially to young people. There are so many social media sites that are run by white supremacist groups that are very racist and anti-gay and anti-Muslim. It's really quite disturbing. At the same time, it's led to an explosion of opportunities for Not in Our Town and for other social movements like this. It's been fantastic. I'll just give you one example. Our next PBS film, two of our pieces we found. One we found from a Not in Our Town leader in Olympia, Washington. She shared something with us on Facebook about a community in Jackson, Mississippi at Ole Miss, about a student movement that a group of African American and white students who had joined together to resist the rebel chant, "The South will rise again," and how the Klan came, but the students were victorious. It was amazing. We found it on Facebook. Yeah. One of our other stories was about a Not in Our School story where a counselor found the resources on NIAT.org, took it back to her school, 5 school districts, 21 schools. We didn't know about it until she formed a group on NIAT.org. So we found it, she found the sources on the internet. So there's incredible potential. Ideas can spread very quickly, and I think we often think of the negative ideas that can spread. The positive ideas can spread. Let's spread this idea of this farmer's market. Let's spread this idea of people coming together to talk about these issues before they become violent, before they become hate crimes, because so often it just, these tensions exist below the surface. So how can we get them to surface before they surface as violence? So how can we find those methods? And you know, I think social media can help greatly.
I mentioned earlier that we had hoped to have the sheriff be with us this evening, and that didn't work out. A member of our audience, however, is here representing the Santa Rosa Police Department. At least he's from the Santa Rosa Police Department. And Paul Henry, lieutenant with the department, has offered before we began to comment on a couple of things. Several people in their cards, Paul, have posed questions about how much of this happens at the lower level that the police department is aware of, that you track, that you are keeping an eye on. Is it something that is on your radar even when it happens at the less dramatic level that doesn't necessarily require any kind of legal intervention? What do you see?
Well, one of the key issues really is, from a law enforcement perspective, most of what we know about what's going on in the community is well, obviously some what the officers observe directly, but a lot of it is what's reported. And as we've talked about tonight, much of what happens isn't reported. And so then it becomes very difficult for law enforcement to be involved and be part of the solution if we're not aware of the problem or the issue. There are hate crimes reported in Santa Rosa and in Sonoma County. It's not a significant number or significant amount. And it does kind of ebb and flow. Sometimes it's more and sometimes it's less. As we saw in the movie, and we're kind of consistent in that most of the time the suspects are younger males in the cases that are reported. And it is something we take very seriously, and we do keep track of.
One of the often cited reasons for this lack of communication is fear or distrust of institutions, including the police department. What sort of efforts are underway in your department to try to get past that?
Well, we are always available to come and speak to any group that has an interest in having us, inviting us to come and talk. That's one of the best ways we can utilize to break down some of these barriers and some of these trust issues. We certainly encourage our officers to get out of the car and talk with people and meet with people. But in coming, you know, if we're invited to some of these community meetings and get the opportunity to come and speak and shake hands and have the community get to know us, you know, as people and on a first name basis, as opposed to just a blue suit and car driving by, those are probably one of the best ways that we can utilize to try to break down some of those barriers.
How do you think it's working so far? I mean,
well, I think there
are areas where it's better than others.
Yeah, I think in some areas it's better than others. We've enjoyed some success with developing relationships in the community, but it is always going to be an ongoing process. And I don't know that you're ever going to be done or satisfied with the relationships you've built. There's always more that you can do, and you can always improve.
We are pleased to have, thank you very much for your comments. A couple of comments have come to me on the cards from some of the student members in our audience here, and they've raised the question about the home environment in which some of these aggressive attitudes are developed, and what can young people do, even if they're getting this negative reinforcement, these messages at home, even if that's not their necessary inclination or the neighbor. Is there any hope for the older generation, or is it so ingrained that the only hope is to turn to the young people instead and try to make changes at that level? This must be something that comes up repeatedly in your conversation with these, the generational interplay.
I think what we hear from young people is, you know, there have been changes, that there, you know, I think that many of them, I think, for example, some of the anti-gay attitudes that people had who were older, they're just, it's not interesting to them. They, you know, they grew up in a world where things have changed, and I do think you see progress in that level. I do think it's a challenging dynamic if you have an atmosphere at home where you hear these things over and over again. I think a lot of studies have shown that your peers are where you, as you get into your teenage years, your peers are where you learn to build your relationships in the future. And, you know, as parents, I'm sure it's difficult to realize that we're sort of out of control. But I think it's also kind of where the hope lies. You know, if schools can play a role, if communities can play a role in, you know, fostering this atmosphere where people talk about these issues, where they talk about intolerance, where they, you know, and they find a way to respond to each other when it happens, I think, you know, it is possible to counter some of that negative stuff that could happen in the home.
So actually we are doing something also that although we meet a Jewish-Muslim dialogue group, which is mostly people of my age or some younger, but then we do what we do at picnics. In the picnic we invite all the youth to come and they get to know each other. So that way, you know, they see their peer and then understand that they are from different faith, for example, or they're coming from different areas or they speak different language, and then they bond with them. And this is a slow process. It will take time. Same thing, you know, like I organize a youth group that we bringing those issues also in our discussion. So they understand they are not alone. And then using the scripture, which is scripture, especially the Quran talks about that we are created by God Almighty and we are all one. We are descendant from Adam and Eve. And this concept has to be instilled in young people. So they don't look at each other and say, well, you know, you're so-and-so, you are so-and-so. But they look at each other and say, well, you know, we are from same parents. We are brothers and sisters, or at least cousins, if not brothers and sisters.
It kind of turns the pattern in inverse. So instead of focusing on differences, focus on the similarities.
Exactly.
How do we do that outside of these structured organizations where you have a gathering like that? When you take that message, is there a way to encourage the youth that you have in that to take that same message back to their classes or to their neighborhoods or to their ball teams or whatever it might be? Is that part of the training that or the message you try to instill?
So this is very, very good point what you're making, and this is what we're trying to instill in them, that they go outside of their community, outside of their circle, and meet other people and get to know. So it has to be done through different projects, so they go and meet other people, and they are doing it, but it's a very slow process. They are more likely to meet somebody like them, or they have a class together and then they bond with them, or they have some friends that live in the neighborhood, or they play ball together, or whatever case may be. But if we keep talking about these other things, that's when you have to meet other people, they are just like us, and break the barrier and go talk to them, take initiative, and so it will happen.
It seems that one of the key issues in this is always the attempt to isolate and feel superior to the other, whatever the other might be. And it's commonplace and perhaps easy to focus on ethnicity as an issue. I just got a card from somebody in the audience who points out that one of the subgroups in the community at large that is often targeted are the homeless people. They made reference in the film to, was it beaner hopping, I think it was? Apparently there is something called bum hopping going around here. It's the first time I'd heard that term. And here is a population that is certainly lacking in resources, is not cohesive, and is very much vulnerable. Attitudes seem to be more important than targets.
I think that we need to be intentional about really learning about one another, even in our own circles, you know, whether it be at work or a community group or at church. We see each other on a daily basis or a weekly basis or a monthly basis, but do we really know one another? And really taking the time to sit down and breaking bread, you know, with the other person, or having a cup of coffee, and really taking time, you know, for me to share my story and for you to share your story with me. And they're really looking for the commonalities or even the differences, and that it's okay. I think that's what we lack, is really being intentional about that relationship that we have with one another. And even with our youth, I think that that's where it has to start, if that becomes the norm for them to really begin to understand about what a relationship is and getting to know another person. Intention is what comes up for me.
Well, my intention before we wrap up here completely, because time is winding down, is to give each of you an opportunity to kind of share any final thoughts and summations and maybe any messages that you would like to promulgate from this or take away yourselves. And Imam, let me ask you to be our lead off in that regard.
So the important thing for me is that that I have to take initiative. That I have to reach out with my neighbors, the people I know, people I meet, and talk with them, learn about them, and then open myself so they can get to know me. And this process that we have to, as you mentioned, that intentionally has to be done. And it's taking a little time. Unfortunately, we are a nation of people that we always target somebody. I mean, going back in the history, and this is becoming a vicious cycle. It has to come to an end. We do not create new targets. We are healing our wounds in the past and moving into in the future. We need to really change the way we look at things, the way we think about other people, and how we can come together. It is not them, it's always us, because we live in the same community. Anything happen in this community is going to affect me, affect you. So if we do not come together and create a community which in the words of Dr. Martin Luther King, beloved community, we'll have a problem.
Thank you. Leticia, any final thoughts to share?
Any final thoughts? Again, I would say, being intentional.
You kind of already did, I guess.
Yeah, with oneself and with others. Being aware, finding the courage to speak up, taking small steps to get to where we want to be. We create our own community.
One of the telling comments, I think, was from the mayor, who says change happens in little pieces, and it's a simple statement of a pretty basic truth, and to the extent we can watch those little pieces unfold around us, I think we can take some small satisfaction in that. I hope we can actually see them. Patrice, any concluding remarks you'd like to leave us with?
Well, I'm so excited to see what happens next here in Sonoma County. In so many ways, the Not in Our Town movement was launched here in Sonoma County at a screening in Healdsburg. We did the first town hall meeting of Not in Our Town here in Healdsburg, and people wanted to talk about what was going on here. And so I'm hoping that this screening is the launch of many, many more, and that we hear about what you do next, and that others can learn from what you do next here in Sonoma County. I think there's great potential. I know that things will come out of this discussion, and there will be other places, and I hope that you will connect with us at Not in Our Town and tell us what you do next.
So that's the conclusion of this particular conversation, but our hope is that it will stimulate others, and that the benefits of this will be felt beyond this meeting, beyond this town, beyond this building, and further conversations will happen. There will be additional Not in Our Town programs. The resources, of course, are on the website for anybody who wants to take advantage of them. So I'd like to thank our panelists. Patrice, thank you very much. Thanks for being with us. Leticia Romero, Imam Ali Siddiqui. It's been a pleasure to have you all here this evening, and I thank you very much for your insights and participation. Thanks also to everyone here in the house who's been part of our studio audience. We appreciate your questions and interest. I'm sorry I couldn't get all the questions woven in. On behalf of KRCB, I'd like to express our enormous appreciation for the staff and crew here at the Community Media Center. We've enjoyed your hospitality very much, and we appreciate the professional quality of the work you've done. It's been a pleasure to work with you. I want to give full props to my colleague Cheryl Scholar, who has been a key organizer in this whole event, and thanks to my boss Nancy Dobbs for kind of suggesting this in the first place. It's been an interesting and enlightening experience for me to participate in. I hope it's been useful for you, and I want to thank you very much for watching the program this evening. Don't forget the websites that we've mentioned, Not in Our Town, or NOIT.org is the resource.
NIOT.org.
And that's available to anyone at any time. This will also be online available for you to watch or refer to your friends and neighbors and online associates, so we appreciate that. This whole thing has been a co-production of Northern California Public Media and the Community Media Center here in Sonoma County. I want to thank you very much for watching tonight. I'm Bruce Robinson. We'll see you next time.